The swirling dust of the Montana Territory seemed to dance on the horizon as Beatrice Johnson clutched her worn leather satchel tighter, standing alone at the stagecoach stop. The year was 1879, and the promise of a new life lay before her, a life she never imagined when she'd answered that newspaper advertisement, seeking a caretaker for 3 motherless children on a cattle ranch 20 miles outside of Helena. "Last stop, miss," the driver called, tipping his hat. "Someone should be along to fetch you. Ain't nobody comes out this way without purpose." Beatrice nodded, smoothing down her simple blue calico dress, trying to appear more confident than she felt. At 22, she had already weathered enough hardships to know that sometimes the only path forward was the one you hadn't planned. After losing her parents to influenza last winter, the small Pennsylvania town she'd called home had nothing left to offer but memories and pity. The advertisement had been specific: seeking respectable woman to care for 3 young children. Room, board, and modest salary provided. Must be of good character, patient disposition, and willing to commit to at least 1 year of service. It was signed simply T. Fairchild, Box 217, Helena, Montana Territory. Beatrice had written immediately, her neat penmanship detailing her experience helping raise her younger siblings and assisting at the local school. When the reply came with train fare enclosed, she'd packed her few belongings, said goodbye to her aunt, and headed west. The sound of approaching hoofbeats pulled her from her thoughts. A wagon appeared, driven by a boy who couldn't be more than 14. "Miss Johnson?" he called out, pulling the team to a stop. "Yes, that's me," she answered, relieved she hadn't been forgotten. "I'm Samuel Fairchild. Pa sent me to fetch you." The boy's face was sun-browned and serious. "Hope you don't mind the wagon. It's a rough ride to the ranch." "I'm grateful for the transportation," Beatrice replied, allowing him to help her up onto the wooden seat. "Your father has 3 children, correct?" Samuel nodded, clicking his tongue to get the horses moving. "That's right. There's me, I'm the oldest. Then Lucy, she's 10, and little James, he's just turned 5. As they traveled, the landscape unfolded before her vast rolling plains giving way to distant mountains, the enormity of the sky almost overwhelming after the crowded eastern cities. Samuel offered little conversation, answering her questions with polite but brief responses. "Your father, he runs cattle?" she asked, trying to learn something of her new employer. "Yes, madam, the Double F Ranch. Pa's built it up these past 15 years. It's a good spread." After a moment, he added, "Ma died last winter. Childbirth fever. The baby, too." Beatrice's heart constricted. "I'm very sorry to hear that." "Pa doesn't talk about it much," Samuel continued, eyes fixed on the trail ahead. "But things haven't been the same. Lucy tries to keep house, but she's just a girl. And James, well, he needs someone to look after him proper." 2 hours later, they crested a small rise, and Samuel pointed. There it is, Double F. Below them spread a modest ranch, a sturdy log house with a wide porch, a large barn, several outbuildings and corrals where horses grazed. In the distance, cattle dotted the grasslands. "It's lovely," Beatrice said sincerely, admiring the setting with the mountains as a backdrop. As they approached, a girl in a faded dress ran out to the yard, her blonde braids bouncing. Behind her toddled a small boy, clutching what appeared to be a wooden horse. Samuel pulled the wagon to a stop. "This here's Lucy and James. Kids, this is Miss Johnson. She's come to look after you." Lucy's expression was guarded, but she curtsied politely. "How do you do, Miss Johnson?" "I'm very pleased to meet you, Lucy," Beatrice replied warmly, then knelt down to eye level with the little boy who was regarding her suspiciously from behind his sister's skirts. "And you must be James. That's a fine horse you have there." The boy didn't speak but clutched his toy tighter. "Pa's out with the hands," Samuel explained, unloading her trunk. "He said to get you settled and he'll be back for supper." The inside of the house was simply furnished but clean, though Beatrice noted signs of a household without a woman's touch, mismatched curtains, boots by the door, and a certain haphazard arrangement to the kitchen. Lucy showed her to a small bedroom off the main living area. "This was Ma's sewing room," she explained. "Pa put a bed in here for you." The room was plain but comfortable, with a narrow bed, a small chest of drawers, and a hook on the wall for clothes. A window overlooked the yard and the mountains beyond. "Thank you, Lucy. This will do nicely." Beatrice smiled at the girl. "Perhaps you could show me around the kitchen. I'd like to prepare supper for when your father returns." Lucy's posture relaxed slightly. "I usually make supper," she said, "but I could show you where things are." The afternoon passed quickly as Beatrice familiarized herself with the house and its routines. She learned that Samuel helped his father with the ranch work, Lucy managed most of the household chores, and little James had been largely left to his own devices. With gentle questions, she began to piece together the shape of their lives and the hollow at the center where their mother had been. As sunset approached, Lucy tensed, glancing repeatedly out the window. "Pa will be back soon," she said. "He likes his supper on time." Together, they prepared a simple meal of salt pork, beans, and cornbread. Beatrice let Lucy take the lead, but quietly offered assistance, not wanting to overstep her bounds on the first day. The sound of horses in the yard announced the return of the ranch hands. Lucy immediately moved to set plates on the table, while James, who had warmed enough to show Beatrice his collection of carved animals, scrambled to the window. "Pa's home," he announced, the first words he'd spoken in her presence. The door opened, and Beatrice's first impression was of size. Thomas Fairchild filled the doorframe, tall and broad-shouldered, his face weathered by sun and wind. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with silver at the temples. His eyes, a startling blue against his tanned skin, found her immediately. "Miss Johnson," he said, his voice deep and gruff. "Mr. Fairchild," she responded, straightening her spine and extending her hand. "Thank you for the opportunity to come work for your family." His calloused hand engulfed hers in a brief, firm handshake. "Hope the journey wasn't too hard on you." "Not at all. Your son was an excellent escort." Thomas nodded at Samuel, who was washing up at the basin by the door. "Good. Well, I expect you're tired. We can discuss particulars tomorrow." His gaze swept over the prepared table. "Supper looks fine." During the meal, Beatrice observed the family dynamics. Thomas spoke little, directing occasional questions to Samuel about the day's work. Lucy watched her father anxiously, jumping to refill his coffee before he could ask. James ate silently, occasionally glancing at Beatrice with curiosity. The absence of their mother hung in the air like an invisible presence. After the meal, Lucy began to clear the dishes. "I'll help," Beatrice offered, rising. "That's your job now," Thomas said, his tone matter-of-fact rather than unkind. "Lucy's been carrying too much. Time she had some childhood left." Lucy looked torn between relief and reluctance to relinquish her domain. "Perhaps Lucy could show me how things are usually done," Beatrice suggested diplomatically, "and tomorrow I can take over." Thomas considered this, then nodded. "Sensible approach." He turned to James. "Time for bed, son." The little boy's face fell. "But Pa—" "No arguments," Beatrice interceded gently. "Would it be all right if I helped James prepare for bed, Mr. Fairchild? It would give us a chance to get acquainted." Thomas's eyes met hers, seeming to assess her character in that moment. Finally, he nodded. "That's what you're here for, I suppose." To James, he added, "Miss Johnson will put you to bed tonight." The bedtime routine revealed much about the state of the household. James's clothes were clean but mended multiple times. He had no nightshirt, sleeping instead in a faded undershirt. When Beatrice suggested washing his face and hands, he looked surprised, as though the routine had been forgotten. After helping him into bed, she asked, "Would you like me to read you a story?" James's eyes widened. "Do you know stories?" "I know many stories," she said, smiling. "My father used to read to me every night." "Ma used to tell me stories," he said softly, "but I don't remember them anymore." Beatrice's heart ached for this little boy who was forgetting his mother. "Then I shall tell you new ones, and perhaps they will help you remember hers." She told him a simple tale about a brave little horse who found his way home, and by the end, his eyelids were drooping. She tucked the blanket around him and brushed the hair from his forehead. "Good night, James," she whispered. "Good night, Miss Johnson," he murmured sleepily. "Will you tell another story tomorrow?" "Every night if you wish," she promised. When she returned to the main room, Lucy was finishing the dishes while Samuel mended a piece of tack by lamplight. Thomas sat at the table, account ledgers open before him. "James is asleep," she reported quietly. Thomas looked up, his expression unreadable. "He went down easy for you. Usually puts up more of a fight." "Children respond to routine," Beatrice said, "and perhaps a bit of novelty. I'm new, after all." He studied her for a moment. "Miss Johnson, I should make my expectations clear. I need someone to look after the children, keep the house, and provide some basic education, especially for James. Lucy's had some schooling, and Samuel learns what he needs working alongside me. I can't offer much in the way of comforts, but you'll be treated fairly." "I understand, Mr. Fairchild. I didn't come west expecting luxury." "Good, because there isn't any." His mouth quirked slightly, not quite a smile. "We rise early here, breakfast at dawn. The children will show you their routines tomorrow." "Very well." She hesitated, then added, "Mr. Fairchild, I noticed James has no nightclothes, and Lucy mentioned there might be some mending needed. With your permission, I could assess what the children need." Something flickered in his eyes, perhaps recognition of all he'd let slide since his wife's death. "Do what you think best for them. There's money set aside for necessities." He closed his ledger. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask." Beatrice nodded. "Thank you. And thank you again for bringing me here. I promise to take good care of your children." For just a moment, his stern expression softened. "That's all I ask, Miss Johnson." Later, in her small room, Beatrice unpacked her few belongings and prepared for bed. Through the window, she could see the vast expanse of stars, brighter than she'd ever seen them back east. The enormity of what she'd undertaken settled over her 3 motherless children, a taciturn widower, and a life far from everything familiar. Yet, as she slipped under the covers, she felt a curious sense of rightness. These children needed her, and perhaps in caring for them, she might find the purpose that had eluded her since her own parents' passing. Dawn broke early on the Montana prairie, painting the eastern sky in breathtaking shades of pink and gold as Beatrice rose and dressed quickly. She'd been awake for some time, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch coming to life, distant cattle lowing, horses nickering in the corral, the low voices of men preparing for the day's work. She found the kitchen already occupied. Lucy was stoking the cook stove while Samuel filled a coffee pot with water. "Good morning," Beatrice greeted them. "You're both up early." "Ranch work doesn't wait," Samuel replied with the seriousness that seemed to be his natural demeanor. "Pa's already out checking the south pasture." "I usually make breakfast," Lucy added, a hint of defensiveness in her tone. Beatrice nodded, understanding the girl's reluctance to surrender her role as the woman of the house. "Perhaps we could work together this morning. You can show me how things are done here." Relief crossed Lucy's face. "Pa likes flapjacks with molasses and bacon when we have it." Working alongside Lucy, Beatrice observed the girl's competence. Despite being only 10, she moved around the kitchen with the confidence of someone who had taken on adult responsibilities out of necessity. Still, there were gaps in her knowledge, things a mother would typically teach a daughter over time. Little James appeared as they were setting the table, his hair sticking up in all directions, clutching his wooden horse. "Morning, Miss Johnson," he said shyly. "Good morning, James," she replied warmly. "Would you like help washing up before breakfast?" By the time the ranch hands filed in for the morning meal, 4 weather-beaten men who nodded respectfully to Beatrice, she had helped James wash and comb his hair and had a hearty breakfast on the table. Thomas was the last to enter, his presence immediately commanding the room's attention. "Morning, Miss Johnson," he said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "See you've found your way around." "Lucy has been an excellent guide," Beatrice replied, pouring coffee for the men. Thomas's gaze lingered on his daughter, who stood straighter under his attention. "She's a good girl," he said, a rare note of tenderness in his voice. Breakfast was a mostly silent affair. The men focused on eating before heading out for the day's work. When they had finished, Thomas addressed Beatrice directly. "I'll be riding the north section today with the hands. Won't be back till supper." He glanced at Samuel. "You'll stay close today. Help Miss Johnson if she needs anything." The boy nodded, clearly disappointed not to be riding out with the men. "Mr. Fairchild," Beatrice said, "if I might ask, are there any particular duties you'd like me to attend to first? Besides caring for the children, of course." Thomas considered this as he rose from the table. House could use a woman's touch, I suppose, been neglected these past months. He looked uncomfortable, as though acknowledging the gap his wife's death had left was still painful. "Do what you think needs doing." After the men departed, Beatrice set about establishing a routine. She had James help gather eggs from the chicken coop, teaching him to count them as they worked. Lucy showed her the household inventories, food stores, linens, soap, while Samuel tended to chores in the barn. The more Beatrice explored, the more she understood the state of the household, clean but disorganized, with evidence of hasty repairs and makeshift solutions. In the children's rooms, she found clothes that had been outgrown, buttons missing, and toys that needed mending. In a trunk at the foot of Lucy's bed, she discovered neatly folded women's clothing. "Those were Ma's," Lucy said quietly from the doorway. "Pa said I could have them when I'm bigger." Beatrice closed the trunk gently. "Your mother had lovely things." "She was pretty," Lucy said, her voice small. "She used to sing while she worked. Pa doesn't like singing anymore." "Sometimes," Beatrice said carefully, "when people are sad, happy things like singing remind them of what they've lost. It doesn't mean they won't ever enjoy those things again." Lucy nodded, though she didn't look convinced. "Will you be making supper tonight?" "I'd like to, if that's all right with you." The girl hesitated, then admitted, "I don't really know how to make much. Ma was teaching me, but then we'll learn together," Beatrice assured her. "Would you like that?" For the first time, a genuine smile brightened Lucy's face. "Yes, madam." The day passed quickly as Beatrice assessed what needed to be done, making mental lists and getting to know the children better. She discovered James had a quick mind, but had received little structured attention. Lucy was desperate to please and afraid of making mistakes. Samuel, trying so hard to be a man, still showed flashes of the boy he was when he thought no one was looking. By late afternoon, Beatrice had a plan. She had James practice his letters while she and Lucy prepared a hearty stew for supper, teaching the girls simple techniques as they worked. She discovered a jar of preserved peaches in the pantry and made a cobbler, something she suspected hadn't graced the table in some time. The men returned as the sun was setting, bringing with them the smells of dust, leather, and honest work. Thomas paused in the doorway, taking in the scene before him, the set table, the bubbling stew. His children engaged in various tasks instead of simply waiting for his return. "Something smells good," he said, the closest thing to approval Beatrice had heard from him. "Miss Johnson made cobbler, Pa," James announced excitedly, "with peaches." "Did she now?" Thomas's eyes found Beatrice's, and something in his expression shifted surprise, perhaps, or a reassessment. Supper was less silent than breakfast had been. The hands, emboldened by the improved fare, shared stories of the day's work. James chatted about the eggs he'd gathered, while Lucy watched anxiously to see her father's reaction to the meal. When Thomas took his first bite of the cobbler, a look of unexpected emotion crossed his face. "Sarah used to make this," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. A hush fell over the table. It was the first time Beatrice had heard him speak his wife's name. "Lucy helped," Beatrice said gently. "She has a natural talent in the kitchen." Thomas looked at his daughter with new eyes. "That so?" Lucy nodded, a flush of pleasure on her cheeks. After the meal, when the hands had gone to their bunkhouse and the children were preparing for bed, Thomas lingered at the table, watching as Beatrice cleared the dishes. "You've made changes already," he observed. She paused, wondering if she'd overstepped. Small ones. I hope they meet with your approval. The children seem easier somehow, even Samuel. He traced a pattern on the wooden tabletop with one finger. It's been hard on them, losing their mother. Children are resilient, Beatrice said, but they need stability and attention. Lucy's been trying so hard to fill her mother's shoes. Too hard, Thomas agreed, a shadow crossing his face. She's just a girl. A remarkable one. Beatrice resumed her work, giving him space to speak if he wished. After a moment he said, I saw you had James practicing his letters. Yes, he's quite bright. With regular lessons he'll read in no time. His mother wanted that for him. Thomas stood, seeming uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. I should check on the horses. Mr. Fairchild, Beatrice called as he reached for his hat. Would it be all right if I took inventory of the children's clothing tomorrow? They may need a few things when we next go to town. He nodded. Whatever they need. At the door, he paused. Miss Johnson, the cobbler was good. Thank you. As the days passed, Beatrice settled into the rhythm of ranch life. Each morning brought new tasks, laundry to be done, bread to be baked, lessons to teach. She established routines for the children, providing the structure they had been missing. James blossomed under her attention, eagerly learning his letters and numbers. Lucy gradually relinquished some of her adult responsibilities, allowing herself occasional moments of childhood. Samuel was harder to reach, holding himself apart as he tried to prove his worth to his father. But even he began to unbend when Beatrice showed interest in his work with the horses and asked him to help with tasks that respected his growing maturity while acknowledging he wasn't yet a man. And then there was Thomas. He remained reserved, but Beatrice noticed subtle changes. He lingered at breakfast, listening to James recount his dreams. He asked Lucy about what she was learning from Beatrice in the kitchen. Once, she even caught him watching from the barn door as she hung laundry, a thoughtful expression on his face. 2 weeks after her arrival, an opportunity arose to visit town for supplies. Thomas announced at breakfast that he needed to meet with the banker and would take the wagon. Miss Johnson, make a list of what you need for the house and children, he instructed. You'll come along. The journey to Helena took most of the morning. Thomas was quiet as he drove, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. Occasionally he would point out landmarks or share bits of local history. That ridge there? Apache raiding party came over it back in '67. Lost 2 good hands before we drove them off. Beatrice listened, building a picture of the life he'd carved out in this wilderness. You've been here a long time. Since '64. Came west after the war with nothing but a bad leg and worse memories. He glanced at her. Sarah was already here, teaching at the mission school. Never thought a woman like that would look twice at a broken soldier. It was the most he'd spoken of his wife, and Beatrice treaded carefully. She must have been a special woman. She was. His hands tightened on the reins. Too good for this hard country in the end. In town, Thomas left her at the general store while he conducted his business. Beatrice found herself enjoying the simple pleasure of selecting fabrics for new clothes for the children, choosing books for James's lessons, and gathering household necessities. The shopkeeper's wife, a friendly woman named Mrs. Potter, helped her navigate the store's offerings. You must be the new woman out at Fairchild's place, she said. Town's been wondering when Tom would find someone to look after those children. I'm just their caretaker, Beatrice clarified. Mrs. Potter's knowing smile suggested she had her own theories. Of course, dear. Still, it's good to see Tom in town. He's kept to himself since Sarah passed. Such a tragedy. It's been difficult for the family, Beatrice acknowledged, unwilling to gossip about her employer. Sarah was well loved here, Mrs. Potter continued. Taught most of the children in these parts at some point. Tom was never the same after she died. Stopped coming to socials, kept the children isolated. People worried. The conversation was interrupted by Thomas's return. Something in his expression made Beatrice wonder if he'd overheard part of it. Found everything? He asked, his tone clipped. Yes, thank you. Mr. Potter's preparing the order now. The ride back to the ranch was quieter than the journey into town. Thomas seemed lost in thought, responding to Beatrice's attempts at conversation with brief answers. As they approached the ranch, he finally spoke. "Mrs. Potter has a loose tongue," so he had overheard. "She seems fond of your family," Beatrice replied diplomatically. "The town thinks I've neglected my children." It wasn't a question. Beatrice chose her words carefully. "I think people understand that grief affects everyone differently, Mr. Fairchild." He gave a humorless laugh. "Do they? Or do they just see a man failing at the job his wife left him?" "From what I've seen," Beatrice said gently, "you've kept your family together and your ranch running under difficult circumstances. That's not failure." Thomas glanced at her, surprise evident in his expression. For a moment, it seemed he might say more, but they were approaching the house where the children waited on the porch. That evening, after the children were in bed, Beatrice sat at the kitchen table mending James's shirts by lamplight. The house was quiet, the only sounds the crackling of the stove and the distant howl of a coyote. The door opened, and Thomas entered, having completed his final check of the property for the night. He paused, seeing her at work. "You should rest," he said. "Morning comes early." "I don't mind," she replied, continuing her neat stitches. "I find mending peaceful." He poured himself a cup of coffee and, to her surprise, sat across from her. "Sarah used to say the same thing. Said it gave her time to think." Beatrice smiled. She was right. "You remind me of her sometimes," he admitted, studying his coffee. "Not in looks, Sarah was fair, like Lucy, but in how you are with the children. Patient, seeing what they need before they know themselves." "They're wonderful children," Beatrice said. "You and your wife raised them well." "Sarah did. I was busy building this place." Regret colored his voice. "Now I wish I'd paid more attention." "It's not too late," Beatrice said softly. "They adore you." Thomas looked up, meeting her eyes. "They seem happier since you came. The house feels different." "I hope that's a good thing." "It is." He hesitated, then added, "I wasn't sure when you first arrived. Wasn't sure I wanted someone new in Sarah's place." "I would never presume to replace their mother," Beatrice assured him. "No, but you've brought something back that was missing." His eyes, so often guarded, held a warmth that made her heart beat faster. "Thank you for that." Later, alone in her room, Beatrice found herself thinking of that moment, the unexpected openness in Thomas's expression, the way his eyes had lingered on her hands as she worked. She told herself not to read too much into it. He was her employer, still grieving his wife. Any feelings beyond gratitude for her care of his children would be inappropriate. Yet, as she drifted off to sleep, her last thoughts were of Thomas Fairchild's rare smile and the way it transformed his solemn face. The weeks flowed into months, and summer settled over the Montana landscape. Under Beatrice's care, the Fairchild home transformed. Curtains that had hung askew were straightened, broken items mended, and a sense of order restored. The children thrived with consistent attention, James now proudly reading simple words, Lucy developing confidence in the kitchen and garden, Samuel gradually accepting that asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness. Thomas, too, was changing. The wall of grief that had surrounded him began to show cracks. He joined the family for meals more regularly, listened to James's reading with genuine interest, and occasionally contributed to the evening conversations instead of retreating to his ledgers. One bright June morning, Beatrice was hanging laundry in the yard when Thomas approached, leading his horse. "Miss Johnson," he called, "I'm riding out to check the north pasture fence. Thought James might like to come along if his lessons are done." Beatrice smiled at the suggestion. "He'd love that. He finished his reading this morning." Thomas nodded, seeming pleased. "Good. I'll saddle the pony for him." She watched as he strode toward the barn, noticing how his limp, a remnant of his war injury, was less pronounced these days. Perhaps the warming weather eased the old wound, or perhaps something else was lightening his step. James was ecstatic about the invitation, racing to find his hat while Beatrice packed a simple lunch for them. When they rode out, the little boy sitting proudly on his pony beside his father, she felt a surge of satisfaction. This was what the children needed: their father's presence as well as her care. With James and Thomas gone for the day, Beatrice turned her attention to a project she'd been planning, organizing the storage room off the kitchen where household items had accumulated in haphazard fashion since Sarah's death. Lucy helped for a while before going to feed the chickens, leaving Beatrice alone amid boxes and trunks. She worked methodically, sorting, discarding what couldn't be salvaged, and reorganizing what remained. In a corner, she discovered a dusty trunk she hadn't seen before. Opening it revealed books, papers, and what appeared to be teaching materials. Sarah's things from her days as a schoolteacher, Beatrice realized. Beneath a stack of primers lay a leather-bound journal. Beatrice hesitated, knowing it was private, but curiosity and a desire to understand the woman whose place she had taken in this household led her to open it. The journal contained Sarah's thoughts and observations spanning several years. Beatrice didn't read extensively, feeling it would be an invasion, but certain passages caught her eye: Sarah's joy in her children's milestones, her love for the ranch despite its hardships, and most poignantly, her deep affection for Thomas. "Thomas brought wildflowers today," one entry read. "He pretends to be so stoic, but his heart is tender beneath that gruff exterior. If only others could see him as I do, gentle with the children, passionate about this land we're building together, and so very loving when we're alone." Beatrice closed the journal, feeling both enlightened and oddly intrusive. She returned it to the trunk, but set aside the teaching materials, thinking they might be useful for James's and Lucy's lessons. That evening, when Thomas and James returned, the boy was bubbling with excitement, recounting every detail of their day together. Thomas looked more relaxed than Beatrice had ever seen him, a contentment in his expression that transformed his features. After the children were in bed, Beatrice approached him as he sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge. "May I join you?" she asked. He nodded, gesturing to the empty chair beside him. "Beautiful night." "It is." She settled beside him, aware of his presence in a way that had become increasingly difficult to ignore. "James had a wonderful time today." "Should have done it sooner," Thomas admitted. "Sometimes I forget how quickly they're growing." Beatrice hesitated, then said, "I found some of your wife's teaching materials today, while organizing the storage room. I thought they might be useful for the children's lessons, but I wanted to ask your permission first." He was quiet so long she feared she had overstepped. Finally he said, "Sarah would have wanted them used. She believed in education." "She seems to have been a remarkable woman." "She was." Thomas turned to look at her directly. "You would have liked each other, I think." "I believe I would have," Beatrice agreed softly. "Miss Johnson, Beatrice," he said, using her given name for the first time. "I've been meaning to tell you your contract will be up in a few months." Her heart sank. Was he preparing to let her go? "Yes, I'm aware. I'd like you to consider staying on. The children need you." He paused, then added more quietly, "We all do." Relief washed over her. "I'd be happy to stay, Mr. Fairchild." "Thomas," he corrected. "I think after all this time, you might call me Thomas." The summer progressed, bringing with it the intense work of ranch life. Hay needed cutting, cattle required moving to fresh pasture, and preparations for the coming winter had to be made. Beatrice found herself increasingly involved in the operations of the ranch, not just the household. Thomas consulted her about supplies, accepted her suggestions for improvements to the house, and even asked her opinion on whether to expand their garden for the next growing season. The distinction between employee and something more began to blur, though neither acknowledged it directly. The children noticed the change. Samuel watched with cautious approval as his father and Beatrice worked together more harmoniously. Lucy, initially protective of her mother's memory, gradually accepted Beatrice's permanent place in their home. James simply basked in the more nurturing environment, flourishing under the combined attention of his father and the woman who had become a mother figure to him. In late July, Thomas announced at breakfast that he had business in Helena that would keep him overnight. "I'll be leaving Samuel in charge of the stock," he said, "with Peterson to help." Peterson was his most trusted hand. "Beatrice, I've left money on my desk for any household needs." It was the first time he would be away overnight since she had arrived. "We'll manage fine," she assured him. After he'd gone, the day proceeded normally until mid-afternoon, when dark clouds began gathering over the mountains. By evening, a violent summer storm had descended, bringing lashing rain and alarming cracks of thunder that made James cry out in fear. "It's all right," Beatrice soothed, gathering the children in the main room. "Let's make a game of it." She built up the fire, made hot chocolate a rare treat, and told stories to distract them from the storm's fury. Even Samuel joined them, though he pretended it was only to reassure his younger siblings. The storm raged throughout the night. Beatrice checked on the children repeatedly, finding James had crawled into Lucy's bed for comfort. She worried about Thomas out in such weather and about the livestock in the fields. Morning revealed the storm's damage, a section of the barn roof torn away, fences down, and the creek that ran through the property swollen dangerously high. Samuel immediately took charge, organizing the hands to begin repairs and check on the cattle. Beatrice was helping Lucy mop up water that had seeped under the kitchen door when they heard horses approaching. Through the window, she saw Thomas riding in, soaked to the skin and mud splattered but blessedly whole. She hurried to the door, relief making her lightheaded. "Thank goodness you're safe. We were worried." Thomas dismounted stiffly, his face grim. Creeks flooded the lower pasture, lost some calves. His eyes scanned the property, assessing damage. "How are things here?" "Part of the barn roof is gone and some fencing, but the house is intact. The children are all fine." He nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "Good. That's what matters." Beatrice helped him remove his sodden coat. "You're chilled through. Let me heat some coffee while you change." When he returned in dry clothes, she had coffee waiting and was preparing a hot breakfast. The children crowded around him, James climbing into his lap without hesitation. "Were you scared in the storm, Pa?" the boy asked. Thomas's arm encircled his son. "A bit," he admitted, "but I knew Miss Beatrice would be taking good care of you, and that helped." His eyes met Beatrice's over the child's head, conveying something deeper than simple gratitude. In that moment, something shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing for months. The day was consumed with storm repairs. Beatrice kept the children occupied while Thomas and the hands worked to secure the barn and round up scattered cattle. By evening, the immediate crisis had passed, though there would be more work in the days ahead. After supper, when the children had gone to bed exhausted by the day's excitement, Thomas found Beatrice on the porch, watching the cleared sky where stars now shone brilliantly. "You handled things well," he said, joining her. "Samuel said you kept everyone calm during the worst of it." "The children were very brave," she replied. "Especially Samuel. He's so much like you." Thomas smiled faintly. "Poor boy." "No," she disagreed gently. "He's fortunate to have a father he admires so much." They stood in companionable silence, the night air cool after the storm. Thomas seemed to be gathering his thoughts, his profile illuminated by the lamplight spilling from the window. "When I was riding back today," he finally said, "all I could think about was getting home, not just to the ranch or even the children, to you." He turned to face her. "I've been alone a long time, Beatrice. Thought it was better that way after losing Sarah. Safer." Beatrice's heart quickened. "And now?" "Now I find myself wondering what it would be like to not be alone anymore." His voice was low, uncertain, "But I don't know if that's something you'd consider. Working for a widower with 3 children on a remote ranch isn't what most young women dream of." "I'm not most young women," Beatrice said softly, "and dreams change. Sometimes what we find is better than what we imagined." Thomas took a step closer. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying that I care deeply for your children," she replied carefully. "And for you, Thomas. More than I should, perhaps, as your employee." His hand, work-roughened but gentle, reached for hers. "You've been more than an employee for some time now. You must know that." When his fingers touched hers, the contact sent warmth spreading through her. "I hoped," she admitted. "I didn't plan this," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Didn't expect to feel this way again. It seemed disloyal somehow." "To Sarah?" He nodded. "But lately I've been thinking she wouldn't want us, the children, to stop living. She had too much joy in her for that." "No," Beatrice agreed. "From what I've learned of her, she wouldn't want that at all." Thomas's hand tightened on hers. "I'm not good with words, Beatrice. Never have been. But I want you to stay, not just as the children's caretaker. If you'll have me have us, I'd like to court you properly. See if what I'm feeling, what I hope you're feeling too, might grow into something permanent." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes. "I'd like that very much, Thomas." His free hand rose to touch her cheek, his fingers trembling slightly. "May I kiss you?" She nodded, her heart too full for words. His lips, when they met hers, were tentative at first, then firmer as he gained confidence. Beatrice leaned into the kiss, her hands coming to rest on his chest where she could feel his heart beating as rapidly as her own. When they parted, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "I never thought I'd find this again," he whispered. "Nor I," she confessed. "After my parents died, I thought my chance at happiness had gone. Coming here was just survival. And now," she smiled up at him, "now it feels like the beginning of something wonderful." Their courtship progressed slowly through the late summer and into fall. Thomas was careful to maintain propriety, mindful of both the children's adjustment and Beatrice's reputation. They shared quiet moments on the porch after the children were asleep, occasional rides to check the property, and, once, a trip to Helena where Thomas proudly walked beside her through town, making their growing relationship clear to the community. The children reacted in their own ways. James was delighted, having already accepted Beatrice as a mother figure. Lucy was hesitant at first, torn between her loyalty to her mother's memory and her growing affection for Beatrice. Samuel watched with the wary assessment of a young man concerned for his family's welfare. One evening in early October, Beatrice was teaching Lucy to embroider when the girl suddenly asked, "Are you going to marry Pa?" Beatrice's needle paused mid-stitch. "Would that upset you if I did?" Lucy considered this seriously. "I thought it would. But then I found Ma's journal." She glanced up, her expression earnest. She wrote that if anything happened to her, she hoped Pa would find someone to love again, someone who would love us too. Emotion tightened Beatrice's throat. "Your mother was very wise. So will you? Marry him, I mean." "He hasn't asked me yet," Beatrice said gently. "But if he did, I would want to know that you and your brothers approved." Lucy's fingers traced the pattern on her embroidery hoop. "James already calls you Ma when Pa can't hear, and Samuel said yesterday that the house feels like a home again." She looked up, her eyes reflecting a maturity beyond her years. "I think Ma would like you." "That's the nicest thing you could say to me," Beatrice replied, deeply touched. The conversation with Lucy seemed to mark a turning point. That weekend, Thomas suggested a family picnic by the creek, which had long since returned to its banks after the summer storm. The day was perfect crisp autumn air, golden leaves, and a clear blue sky. After they had eaten, the children scattered to explore James, hunting for interesting rocks, Lucy collecting late wildflowers, and Samuel skipping stones across the water. Thomas led Beatrice a short distance away to a fallen log overlooking a bend in the creek. "Sarah and I used to come here when we were courting," he said as they sat. "It was her favorite spot on the ranch." Beatrice looked around at the beautiful setting. "I can see why." Thomas took her hand, his expression more serious than usual. "I've been thinking a lot lately, about the future, about us." Her heart began to race. "Have you?" "Beatrice, when you came here, I was half alive at best, just going through the motions for the children's sake." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "You brought life back to this ranch, to me." "You and the children have given me a home," she replied softly. "Something I thought I'd lost forever." He shifted to face her directly. I love you, Beatrice. I want to build a life with you, if you'll have me. Not as an employee, but as my wife, the children's mother, my partner in everything. Tears of happiness filled her eyes. I love you too, Thomas. And yes, I'd be honored to be your wife. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. This was my grandmother's, he said, tipping a delicate gold ring with a small pearl into his palm. Sarah wore it until she couldn't anymore. I had it sized for you in Helena last week. It's beautiful, Beatrice whispered as he slipped it onto her finger. Like you, he said simply, and kissed her with a tenderness that spoke of promises kept and new beginnings. They were interrupted by James's excited shout. Look what I found! The boy came running toward them, clutching something in his small hands. Behind him, Lucy and Samuel followed at a more dignified pace. James skidded to a stop in front of them. Then noticed their joined hands and the ring now sparkling on Beatrice's finger. His eyes widened. Are you going to be our ma for real now? Thomas laughed, the sound freer than Beatrice had ever heard from him. That depends on whether you children approve. I do, James declared instantly. Lucy smiled, her eyes shining. Me too. They all looked at Samuel, who stood slightly apart, his expression unreadable. After a moment that seemed to stretch forever, a slow smile spread across his face. About time, Pa, he said, and the tension broke as Thomas pulled him into a one-armed hug. That evening, after returning to the ranch, Thomas announced their engagement to the Hands, who offered congratulations with varying degrees of enthusiasm and awkwardness. Peterson, the oldest and longest serving, approached Beatrice privately. Mrs. Fairchild, the first one, was a fine woman, he said gruffly, but she'd be pleased to see the boss smiling again, and the little ones thriving. You've done good here, Miss Johnson. Thank you, Beatrice replied, touched by the taciturn man's approval. I'll do my best to continue deserving your good opinion. The wedding was planned for early December, before the worst of winter set in. Word spread quickly through the scattered community, and Beatrice was touched to receive visits from neighboring ranch wives bearing gifts and good wishes. Mrs. Potter from the general store arrived with a beautiful length of cream-colored wool for a wedding dress. The whole town's talking about it, she confided. Most had given up hope that Thomas would ever remarry. You've accomplished quite a feat, my dear. It wasn't an accomplishment, Beatrice corrected gently. It was simply finding where I belong. As the wedding day approached, preparations consumed the household. Lucy helped Beatrice sew her dress, learning stitches her mother had never had the chance to teach her. James practiced carrying the rings with solemn importance. Samuel worked with his father to prepare the house for winter, building a new bed frame for the master bedroom that would soon be Beatrice's as well. The night before the wedding, after the children were asleep, Thomas found Beatrice sitting by the fire, lost in thought. Having second thoughts? He asked, only half joking. She smiled up at him. No, just thinking about how much has changed in a year. Last December I was alone in Pennsylvania, wondering what would become of me. And now, he prompted, sitting beside her. Now I have everything I never dared to hope for. She leaned against him as his arm encircled her shoulders. A home, a family, love. We're the fortunate ones, Thomas said, pressing a kiss to her temple. You could have chosen an easier life than a rancher's wife. I didn't fall in love with your ranch, Thomas Fairchild, she said, turning to face him, though it is beautiful. I fell in love with you. With your strength, your devotion to your children, your quiet kindness. She touched his face gently. With your hands that can break a wild horse and yet be so gentle when you touch me. His eyes darkened with emotion. Tomorrow can't come soon enough. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the mountains crisp against the winter sky. The ceremony was held in the small church in Helena, with most of the community in attendance. Lucy and James stood with Beatrice, while Samuel stood proudly beside his father. When Thomas recited his vows, His voice was steady and sure, his eyes never leaving Beatrice's face. When it was her turn, she spoke from her heart, promising to love not just him, but his children as her own. The minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Thomas kissed her with a promise of the life they would build together. As they turned to face their guests, Beatrice caught sight of the children's faces, James beaming, Lucy wiping away a tear, and Samuel standing tall, a weight visibly lifted from his young shoulders. The celebration continued at the ranch, where tables had been set up in the main room and neighbors had contributed food and music. As afternoon turned to evening, Thomas drew Beatrice aside. "I have something to show you," he said, leading her to their bedroom. On the dresser sat a small wooden box she hadn't seen before. Thomas opened it to reveal a silver locket. "This was Sarah's," he explained. "Inside is a miniature portrait of her. I thought, perhaps Lucy should have it now. A way to keep her mother with her, while also embracing you as the mother she has now." He looked uncertain. "Would that be all right with you?" Beatrice felt a surge of love for this man who understood so well what his daughter needed. "It's perfect, Thomas. Truly perfect." Later, as they danced in the crowded main room, Thomas held her close and whispered, "Happy, Mrs. Fairchild?" "Completely," she answered truthfully. Over his shoulder, she could see the children, James attempting to teach one of the ranch dogs to dance, Lucy proudly wearing her mother's locket while talking to Mrs. Potter, and Samuel awkwardly asking a neighbor girl to dance. This was her family now, her home. When they'd first met, Thomas had seen her gentle hands caring for his children and begun to fall in love. Beatrice had seen a broken man trying his best and fallen just as hard. Together, they had built something neither expected to find again, a family made whole through love, patience, and the courage to begin anew. Spring came early to the Montana Territory in 1881. The harsh winter gave way to green shoots and newborn calves, and the Double F Ranch awakened to the promise of a prosperous year ahead. Beatrice stood on the porch, watching as Thomas and Samuel worked with a new foal in the corral. 4 months of marriage had brought changes to the ranch: fresh curtains in the windows, a newly expanded garden plot, and most significantly, a sense of contentment that seemed to permeate the very walls of their home. "Mama!" James called, racing from the chicken coop with a basket of eggs. He had started calling her Mama the day after the wedding, the name falling from his lips as naturally as if he'd always used it. "Careful with those eggs," she cautioned, smiling as he slowed his pace. "I counted 12, he announced proudly when he reached her, "and I didn't break any." "Excellent work," she praised, taking the basket. "Why don't you go tell your father? I think he's almost finished with the foal." As James darted off toward the corral, Lucy emerged from the house, drying her hands on her apron. At nearly 11, she was growing tall, looking more like her mother each day. "The bread's rising," she reported, "and I finished my arithmetic." "Thank you, Lucy." Beatrice put an arm around the girl's shoulders. "You're becoming quite the accomplished young lady." Lucy leaned into the embrace. Her acceptance of Beatrice as her stepmother had deepened gradually, nurtured by Beatrice's respect for Sarah's memory and her genuine affection for the girl. Together, they watched as Thomas lifted James onto the fence for a better view of the foal. Samuel, now 15 and shooting up like a weed, demonstrated how to approach the nervous animal. "Pa seems happy," Lucy observed, "different than before." "I hope so," Beatrice replied. "It's because of you," the girl said with certainty. "You made us a family again." Before Beatrice could respond, a wave of dizziness washed over her. She gripped the porch railing, taking a deep breath. "Mama?" Lucy's voice was concerned. "Are you all right?" "Just a little lightheaded," Beatrice assured her. "I haven't been sleeping well lately." Lucy studied her with knowing eyes. "Is it the baby?" Beatrice stared at her stepdaughter in surprise. "How did you— Mrs. Peterson said you had the look about you," Lucy explained. "And you've been sick in the mornings. Does Pa know?" "Not yet," Beatrice admitted. "I wanted to be certain before I told him." She had been waiting for the right moment, wanting to share the news privately. Lucy's face lit up. "Can I be there when you tell him? Please?" Beatrice smiled, touched by the girl's excitement. "Of course. Tonight, after supper, when James is in bed." The day passed in its usual rhythm of chores and lessons. By evening, Beatrice found herself growing nervous about sharing her news. Thomas noticed her picking at her food during supper. "Not hungry?" he asked quietly. "Just a little tired," she replied, meeting his concerned gaze with a reassuring smile. After James had been tucked in with his nightly story, Lucy lingered in the main room where Thomas was reviewing the spring breeding records. Beatrice joined them, sitting beside her husband on the sofa. "Lucy, it's getting late," Thomas prompted, glancing up from his papers. "She can stay a moment," Beatrice said, taking his hand. "I have something to tell you both." Well, Lucy already suspects, but Thomas set aside his work, giving her his full attention. "What is it?" Beatrice took a deep breath. "I'm going to have a baby, our baby, in late October, I think." For a moment, Thomas stared at her in stunned silence. Then a slow smile spread across his face, transforming it with joy. "A baby," he repeated, as if testing the word. "You're sure?" She nodded, her own smile widening. "Quite sure." He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of porcelain. "Beatrice," he whispered against her hair. "Oh, Beatrice." Lucy was practically bouncing with excitement. "I knew it. I'm going to have another brother or sister." Thomas extended an arm, including her in their embrace. "You'll be a wonderful big sister, Lucy. You already are." Later, after Lucy had gone to bed and they were alone in their bedroom, Thomas placed his hand gently on Beatrice's still flat stomach. "I never thought I'd have this again," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "After losing Sarah and the baby, I couldn't even imagine it." Beatrice covered his hand with hers. "I know. Are you truly happy about it?" "Happy doesn't begin to describe it." He gathered her close. "You've given me so much already: love, partnership, a mother for my children. And now this." "Our family is growing," she said softly. "Our family," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "Yes, that's exactly what we are." The news of the coming baby spread quickly through the household and beyond. James was delighted by the prospect of no longer being the youngest. Samuel, in his quiet way, began building a cradle in the evenings, working from memory of the one his father had made for James. As spring gave way to summer, Beatrice's condition became more pronounced. Thomas grew increasingly protective, insisting she rest during the heat of the day and enlisting Lucy to take on more household responsibilities. "I'm pregnant, not invalid," Beatrice protested one afternoon when he found her hanging laundry. "Humor me," he replied, taking the basket from her hands. "I worry." She softened, understanding the fear that underlay his concern. "The doctor said everything is progressing normally. This isn't like what happened with Sarah." Thomas nodded, though the worry didn't entirely leave his eyes. "I know, but I can't help it. You and this baby. You're my future, Beatrice." As her pregnancy advanced, Beatrice found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. 1 year ago, she had been a lonely young woman traveling west to care for a stranger's children. Now she was a wife, a mother to those children, and carrying a new life within her, a tangible symbol of the love she and Thomas had found together. On a warm August evening, the family gathered on the porch after supper, enjoying the lingering daylight. James played with his wooden animals on the steps, Lucy read a book Beatrice had ordered from back east, and Samuel whittled a small figure from a piece of pine. Thomas sat beside Beatrice, his hand resting comfortably on her rounded belly. Occasionally the baby would kick, bringing a look of wonder to his face that never dimmed no matter how many times he felt it. "What shall we name the baby?" Lucy asked, looking up from her book. "We haven't decided yet," Beatrice replied. "Do you have suggestions?" James piped up immediately. "Thunderbolt if it's a boy." Thomas chuckled. "That's a fine name for a horse son, but perhaps not for your brother." "If it's a girl," Lucy said thoughtfully, "maybe Sarah? After Ma?" A silence fell over the porch. Beatrice glanced at Thomas, whose expression had grown thoughtful. "That's a lovely idea, Lucy," Beatrice said gently. "What do you think, Thomas?" He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I think your mother would be honored, but perhaps as a middle name? This little one should have her own identity, too." Lucy nodded, understanding. "What about Elizabeth Sarah? We could call her Beth." "Elizabeth Sarah Fairchild," Thomas tested the name. "It has a nice sound." "And if it's a boy?" Samuel asked, his knife pausing in its work. Beatrice had been considering this privately. "What about Robert Thomas, after your father Thomas and my father Robert?" Thomas's eyes met hers, filled with love. "Perfect," he agreed. As autumn approached, the ranch prepared not only for the coming baby, but also for winter. Thomas hired an additional hand to help with the harvest, freeing Samuel to assist more around the house. The extra bedroom was converted into a nursery, with Samuel's cradle taking pride of place near the window. In late September, Thomas's sister Eleanor arrived from St. Louis, having arranged to stay through the birth and early weeks. A widow herself, Eleanor brought practical experience and a brisk efficiency that complemented Beatrice's gentler approach. "You've done wonders with this place," Eleanor observed as Beatrice showed her around. "Thomas wrote that you've transformed more than just the house." "We've transformed each other," Beatrice replied simply. Eleanor studied her thoughtfully. "I worried about him after Sarah died. He withdrew so completely. But the man who greeted me today as my brother again, the one I knew before the war, changed him." "He's a remarkable man," Beatrice said. "I'm fortunate he opened his heart to me." "The fortune runs both ways, I'd say." Eleanor patted her hand. "Now, let me see what needs doing before this baby arrives. You look ready to pop any day." Eleanor's prediction proved accurate. Just a week after her arrival, Beatrice woke in the early hours of October 12th with the unmistakable pains of labor. Thomas summoned the midwife from Helena while Eleanor took charge of the household, keeping the children occupied and preparing the birthing room. By midday, Beatrice's labor was well established, and Thomas was banished to pace the porch with Samuel, while Lucy helped Eleanor and the midwife. The hours passed slowly for Thomas. Each cry from within the house sent him into fresh agony of worry. Samuel, showing wisdom beyond his years, stayed close, occasionally offering quiet words of reassurance. "Ma's strong," he said, using the term he had only recently begun to apply to Beatrice. "And Aunt Eleanor won't let anything happen to her or the baby." As dusk fell, James joined them on the porch, his small face solemn. "Is Mama going to heaven like my first mama did?" Thomas gathered his youngest son into his arms. "No, James, Beatrice is going to be just fine. Having a baby is hard work, but the midwife is taking good care of her." The boy seemed unconvinced until Lucy appeared at the door, her face alight with excitement. "Pa, come quick, it's a girl!" Thomas practically flew into the house, Samuel and James on his heels. They found Beatrice propped up in bed, tired but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. "Thomas," she said softly as he approached, "come meet your daughter." He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, his hands trembling slightly as she passed him the infant. The tiny face, red and wrinkled, bore a dusting of dark hair like his own. "She's perfect," he whispered, overcome. "So perfect." The children crowded around, eager for their first glimpse of their sister. James's earlier fears vanished in the excitement of becoming a big brother. Lucy cooed over the baby's tiny fingers, while Samuel stood slightly apart, a pleased smile on his usually serious face. "Elizabeth Sarah Fairchild," Thomas announced, his voice thick with emotion. "Welcome to our family, little Beth." That night, after the excitement had settled and the household was quiet, Thomas sat beside Beatrice as she nursed their daughter. "I was so afraid," he admitted, watching the baby's small hand curl around his finger. "When I heard you cry out, all I could think of was Sarah and how quickly everything went wrong." "But it didn't," Beatrice reminded him gently. "We're both here, safe and sound." He nodded, lifting her hand to press a kiss to her palm. "When you first came here, I noticed your hands, how gentle they were with the children. I think I started falling in love with you that very night, though I wouldn't admit it to myself for months. And I noticed how your eyes followed your children with such love, even through your grief," she replied. "That's when I knew you were a man worth knowing." Baby Beth made a small sound of contentment as she drifted to sleep at her mother's breast. Thomas carefully lifted her, placing her in the cradle beside their bed. "Our daughter," he said wonderingly, "the first of our children to carry both our blood, but not the first to carry both our love." "No," Beatrice agreed, thinking of the 3 sleeping children down the hall who had become hers in every way that mattered. "Our family was already complete. She's just the newest blessing in a long line of them." Thomas stretched out beside her, his arm protective around her shoulders. "I love you, Beatrice Fairchild, more than I have words to say." "And I love you," she answered, resting her head on his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days to come." As they drifted toward sleep, the Montana night wrapped around the ranch house where 2 people who had once been strangers now lay entwined, their hearts beating in unison, their future stretching before them like the endless prairie sky, vast, beautiful, and full of promise. 5 years later, on a bright spring morning in 1886, Beatrice stood on the porch of the Double F Ranch, watching as Thomas demonstrated roping techniques to their children. Beth, now a spirited 5-year-old with her father's dark hair and her mother's determined spirit, clapped with delight as her brother James, 10 years old and growing gangly, successfully lassoed a fence post. Beside them, 3-year-old Robert Thomas Fairchild Bobby to the family attempted to mimic his older siblings with a piece of rope far too long for his small hands. Lucy, now 16 and blossoming into a beautiful young woman, adjusted his grip with the patience she had learned from Beatrice. Samuel was absent from the family tableau, having left 2 months earlier to attend the university in Denver, the first Fairchild to pursue higher education, supported enthusiastically by both his father and stepmother. So much had changed in the years since Beatrice had first arrived at this ranch. The house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family. The operation had prospered under Thomas's careful management and Beatrice's practical support. What had once been a struggling widower's attempt to hold things together was now one of the most respected ranches in the territory. But the greatest changes were less visible: the healing of old wounds, the blending of 2 broken families into one whole, the love that had grown from the tentative beginnings of that first year into something as solid and enduring as the mountains on the horizon. Beatrice's hand instinctively moved to her abdomen, where the newest Fairchild was just beginning to make its presence known. She hadn't told Thomas yet, wanting to be certain before adding to the joy and commotion of their household. As if sensing her thoughts, Thomas looked up from his demonstration and met her eyes across the yard. Even after 5 years of marriage, that simple connection still sent warmth through her. He excused himself from the children and walked toward her, his limp barely noticeable now except on the coldest days. "You're looking mighty pleased with yourself, Mrs. Fairchild," he observed, joining her on the porch. "I'm pleased with all of us," she corrected, leaning into him as his arm circled her waist. "Look at them, Thomas. Look at what we've built together." He followed her gaze to where their children played, their laughter carrying on the spring breeze. "Best work I've ever done," he agreed. "Though I can't take much credit. You're the heart of this family." "We both are," she said, turning in his arms to face him. "And speaking of family," Thomas's eyes widened as he caught her meaning. "Beatrice, are you saying—" She nodded, smiling at the joy that immediately transformed his features. "Early autumn, I think. Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday when I was in town." He pulled her close, mindful of the children who might notice. "Another baby," he marveled. "Lord, woman, you do keep life interesting." "Too interesting?" she teased. "Never." He kissed her forehead gently. "Every day with you is a blessing I never expected to have." That evening, after the younger children were asleep and Lucy had retired to read the latest letter from Samuel, Thomas and Beatrice sat together on the porch swing he had built for her second Christmas as his wife. The spring night was cool but pleasant, the stars brilliant overhead. "I've been thinking," Thomas said, his arm around her shoulders. "Samuel won't be the last to leave the nest. Lucy's already had offers of courtship, though she's focused on her studies for now." Beatrice acknowledged. "Time passes so quickly." "It does." He was quiet for a moment, then continued. "I want them all to have options, Beatrice, not just Samuel. Lucy should be able to teach if she wants, like her mother. James talks about becoming a doctor. And who knows what Beth and Bobby will dream up." "And this little one," Beatrice added, placing his hand on her stomach. "Yes." Thomas's voice grew more certain. "I don't want them limited by this ranch, feeling they have to stay for my sake. I want them to choose their paths." Beatrice understood what he was saying. "You're worried about the legacy of the double F, about who will take it on when we're older." He nodded. "It's been my life's work, but it shouldn't be an obligation for our children. Perhaps one of them will love it as you do," she suggested. "Or perhaps we'll find another way when the time comes." She squeezed his hand. "We have years yet to figure it out, Thomas." "You always see the way forward," he said admiringly. "From that first day when you stepped off the stagecoach, you've been showing me possibilities I couldn't see myself." Beatrice smiled at the memory. "I was terrified that day. A spinster schoolteacher with no prospects, traveling to a strange place to care for a stranger's children. And now? Now I'm a rancher's wife with 5, soon-to-be 6 beautiful children, a home I love, and a husband who still makes my heart race when he walks into a room." She leaned up to kiss him softly. "I'd say things worked out rather well." Thomas returned her kiss with one of his own, deeper and more thorough. Even after years of marriage, their passion for each other remained undimmed. "Very well indeed," he agreed when they parted, "though I take exception to the spinster description. You are the most beautiful woman I've ever known, inside and out." "Flatterer?" she accused lightly. "Truth-teller," he corrected. "Remember what I told you? I fell in love with your hands first, how gentle they were with my children that very first night. Everything else followed from there." Beatrice smiled, remembering. "And I fell in love with your heart, how it showed in everything you did for your family, even when you were drowning in grief." Thomas held her close as the night deepened around them. "We saved each other, I think." "We did," she agreed, "and we'll keep on doing so every day for the rest of our lives." As they sat together, planning their future and that of their growing family, Beatrice reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From loss and loneliness to love and belonging, from strangers to soulmates, from broken pieces to a family made whole. She had come west to care for a cowboy's children, never imagining she would find her heart's home. He had noticed her gentle hands and begun to heal. Together, they had built something neither had dared to hope for, a love as vast as the Montana sky and as enduring as the mountains that watched over their ranch. And in that love, they had found not just happiness, but the very definition of home,